Okay, I will start with the editor's preface, because in that case this is important. Okay. Mr. Rabinovich's classic Endgame manual was first published in the Soviet Union in 1927 and reissued in 1938 under the title of The Endgame. So the book has a different title in Russian. We present here a translated and revised edition, meaning that we gladly accepted Mr. Mahvir's excellent translation of the 1933 Russian text, and then made slight alternations to the voice to make the final result sound more natural to the mind's ears in our less formal times, yet without changing the meaning of any statement. This version, English version, was released in 2013, if I remember right. Also, this work was conceived as a teaching aid for group lessons. The individual student can make good use of everything in it, except for the foreword, therefore we will skip that. The book you're holding truly constitutes a complete course on the endgame, assuming little about the reader's knowledge of the final phase of the game, but taking the student to a high level of understanding. Okay, and then the translator talks about the stuff you let out because nobody is talking about anymore. He mentions the theory of corresponding squares. The most extensively examined part of the game, that's the author by the way, the most extensively examined part of the game is the end game. The hardest to analyze exactly is the opening, and the least comprehensive studied phase is the middle game. That often you hear from gurus or whatever that you should ignore the openings and only focus on the end games. I don't say that. But the reason for saying that is that the endgame theory is easy to accomplish. You just have to study it to get a basic understanding, while the other stuff is fluent and it's a lot of work. And you know, if you learn 10 openings, at best you can use one. And if you learn end games, you can use it in most games. Therefore people say that end games are more important. But that doesn't mean that you should, even as a beginner, ignore all the other parts of the game, you know? Okay, let's go on. Endgame theory, in its accuracy, can aspire to be a comparison with at most fully finished of science, mathematics. Okay, I like to read that. Opening theory has roughly the same authenticity as the physical and chemical theories. Middle game play is the most complex part of the game and therefore the least amenable to precise investigation. Here, creativity is given the greater scope. I would agree to that to a part, but of course you can learn many patterns for the middle game. For example, you can learn how to play against the isolated pawn, or how to use the card spider structure for minority attack, etc. So I do not fully agree here, but let's not forget the guy wrote it 100 years ago. As we set forth to lay out the best result stage, that is the endgame, we consider our task to be primarily the connected, systematic presentation of all that has been given, and to give the presentation the greatest possible level of clarity. Okay, not the way I'm reading it, but you get a point. We consider it less important to require that checkmate be given in the fewest possible moves. Therefore, we will not necessarily seek the shortest path to victory, as much as the clearest and most easily remembered solution. You know, people, what he means here. Sometimes people, you see me simplifying positions so that I'm make crazy captures and recaptures, and then obviously I get a bit worse position, but I do that to have a worse position which I can play in a very easy way. And that's what he's talking about here. Not going always for the shortest path of victory, just play safe, that maybe you need 2 or 3 moves more, but you will win easily. That's what that's about. And we come to the first chapter, the simplest mates. We submit with the rook, the queen, and the 2 bishops. Okay, that's all in the chapter, but we will do the one by one. The winning plan and all of this endgame is the same. The action of your own pieces, including the king, should be strengthened as much as possible, while the enemy king must be hemmed in. Hemmed in, that means something like restricted, and then driven into a corner or the edge of the board. However, you should not pursue this blindly. Hemming in the opponent must be done carefully, so as to avoid stalemate, or in German we say Patt. Below we see how this all carried out in practice. Okay, he's talking about a complete book here, and now we finally start with the very first thing. Mate with the rook. Before all else, you must have in mind clear idea of the goal. Oh, nice way to say that. What is the position that white wants to achieve? Generally speaking, is mate possible. Mate is possible only after the enemy king has been forced to the edge, or better, to the corner of the board. You already see that here. I prepared that. You see the white king is at the corner. He is at front rank from the white perspective, and these are the squares the white king could move to, but he cannot move here because the opponent king is guarding the squares and the rook is attacking him. He cannot capture the rook, he cannot move away out of the attack, and there's no other piece he can move between him and the rook, therefore it's checkmate. By the way, other checkmate, for example, would be for the case he talked about with the corner, you know. So now we saw 2 ideas, 2 goals he could achieve. In this case, the black king has been checkmate in the middle of the edge line of the board. Such mates are only possible when the enemy king is in opposition, I talked about that is standing directly opposite the king on the same file or rank with 1 square between them. So in the top half of the board, mate is delivered to the black king standing in the corner. Here we don't need the white king to be in the opposition. We already talked about what opposition is. This kind of position, that is both kings on the same file with 1 square between them, is also called direct opposition. Okay, maybe we should remember that in the future. It's enough for the white king to be located on the 6th rank. 1 knight's move away to block the king. Okay, 1 knight's move, the knight moves this way, and therefore he calls it 1 knight moves away. Now we must answer another question: how to drive the opponent's king in the direction of the edge of the board. If you start like this, then you have to chase the king back here or here. And how to do that? For example, where must the white king and rook be in order to force the black king from the d6 to the next last 7th rank? Again, the white king must be in opposite, that is on d4, and the rook must give check on the 6th rank. Okay, so in that case it would be this position. It would be an artificial checkmate. The king cannot go here. The king is attacked, the rook also attacked this square, so the king has to move back. In order to drive the black king from the edge square a6 or h6 to the 7th rank, it's not necessary for the white king to be in the opposition. That's on f4 over instead. I mean, he's talking about a situation where black king is positioned here, so it has not to be the opposition. To the second question, we can now give a short answer. In order to drive the king to the edge, it's enough to give check at the moment when the kings are in opposition. Okay, that's funny, we will do that. So that's the general case. So the king is not at the edge where we want him to be, or in the corner. The author from this book will not do perfect approach. He's doing the approach we just talked about, that you give check when the king is on the opposition to chase the king back. So the white pieces are not coordinated, and the black king occupies its best possible position in the center. The goal may be achieved in any one or several different ways. First, we will show the slow but sure method, which works in all cases. We go to e8. So we block the king from here. This move stamps the enemy king, we already talked about it. Not allowing him to get to the right half of the board. The E, the F, the G and the H files. So this one are gone for the black king. So the king moves to d5. The black king maneuvers the d file, preferring to stay in the center. I mean, I guess that's understandable. White's first task is to force the black king to go from the d file to the c file. In order to achieve this, the white king must approach, okay? I will not read all comments now. Okay, d6. Now you guys wonder why he is going to d6. If he would go to d4, that is the opposition. Then we would play rook d8, is a check. King cannot go here, is attacked, so he would have to go back in this direction, and of course he doesn't want that, and therefore he went to d6 instead. And after going to d6, now carefully, the rook is attacked. So the rook retreats to the opposite end of the board. Is less vulnerable there. Okay. So now that's interesting. A move typical in the endgame. The problem is that the opposition does not always favor white. It favors white only when he has the move. And if white took the opposition with king f6, then black would immediately break the opposition by king d5. Therefore, white makes a waiting move, as if he inviting black to take the opposition himself. Okay. Doesn't want to do that. And again, the same situation. If he went here, we give the check. Okay, where have I been? So, and now we have the same checkmate structure, let's call it this way. So the black king aims for the center as Cassie had moved back, and we have followed with the rook. And now we are doing the intermediate thing, and king goes back. And we follow with our king. For the people who just jumped in, that's the slow but sure method, you know? That's not the fastest method, okay. Now white places his king not in opposition, but the knights move away. We already talked about that, from the black king, letting his opponent take the opposition with king c7. That means if the king would go here, again we would give the check and the king had to move back. Okay, so now the same procedure as we saw before. It's going for the rook. It's going back, and again if we move here he can turn away, and if the king had moved to c2, if we just get closer. So I explained the other variation, and now again the thing we had before, we do the so-called waiting move. So if the king goes here, it is a check, and therefore he escapes. Or he tries to escape, better state. So it's again the same idea. If the king goes back, boom. He can move directly, by the way, here. It doesn't make a difference. So the C file is cut off, while the king covered before the part of this file. And now again, we don't go into opposition, we go here so that we can chase the king. By the way, if you wonder, I'm just doing the book moves. Again, we already had that. Follow. And now again the same thing. If you would go here, the king would slip out of the opposition and therefore we do the waiting move. He has to go there, as case it would be the opposition. By the way, if he had played this one, White could already have played card the B line, but we would not do it. Instead, we would play this one. Then he goes here. We would be trapped. You had to move back, and then it would be checkmate. Okay, but most resistance. We go to b7 and rook b2. Now we go, he won't go here because then we can checkmate him pretty soon. That is the checkmate picture we had before, and now we go on with the so-called safe way. You already know that. For example, you play this way. Again, the waiting move, we had that before. He won't go here, of course. And what follows now? Checkmate. Checkmate. So, we followed the way Otto showed us here. You saw me doing the way of the book. I mean, it worked, definitely. What is the sole drawback of the system I just showed you? It takes too long. I mean, we just made 37 moves, and that's not far from 50, the maximum number of moves for this type of ending. So we try to achieve our goal faster to checkmate the opponent king. So before, White receptively and steadily forced black from the right to the left and gave the mate to the far left file. However, we shall see that a change of front is frequently possible and it shortens the solutions considerably. Okay, but we start again the same way. We're against d5. We approach a king here. So I would say that that's the same so far. Okay, now we are on the fast approach. You know that so far it was the same move. So far it was the same move. So up to this point, White has driven his opponent from right to left. Black opposed this effort, preferring to leave the center rather than be driven left into the C file. Yes, we had it before. The outcome was tracked out in the above example because White decided that come what may, he was going to checkmate his opponent on the left edge of the board. That's the one we talked about before. However, with king d6, black has come too close to the front edge. a8, h8. So we're talking about this one. And this circumstance should be exploited immediately. So we do bam this move. And suddenly the king is already cut here. And while we are still moving forward and back with the king in the preface approach, we accelerate the stuff now. So it's the change of front. Why should black be driven as before, when the enemy must be knocked off 4 positions in all the D, C, B and A files? Isn't it better to occupy the 5th rank, thereby giving the opponent only 3 ranks, the 6th, 7th and 8th, instead of the 4 he had before? Yeah, nice rhyme. Black has to move, king e6, king e4. White king goes into the opposition with blacks, preparing to check him on the 6th rank. So the king goes back because he wants to go to the center. And by the way, and if the king had went to b7 to dodge all the stuff, immediately we had moved the king. And suddenly the black king already had cut away from the 6th rank, so he had only two ranks left. So cutting off still another rank. And if it went to b6, we had replied king d4. If the king had moved here, we had given a check. So it's again to the last line, either the b file or the 7th rank. Because this one is blocked. But he moved to d6. d4. Now you will already see the system maybe. 6. White holds off on his check until the moment the black king stands in the opposition, since in this position black will have to go to the next to last line. And now you imagine we don't move the rook away, we use the king again. So that is stronger than a rook h6 when black could stretch out the game, wait king e7. In general, the position of the rook protected by the king is, this one, is very strong as it cuts off the black king in 2 directions. This direction and this direction, okay. King c7. Now we play rook h6 because he cannot go back because of the chasing back. And if you have go this way, we had really blocked him out here. So he tried this approach. And now again we don't go into the opposition if it's not our turn. Now again we're not just moving away, we're going here with the rook. That's the strongest move because it shortens the solution by 1 move. Checkmate. So this time we only needed 17 moves. That is a lot of 7 moves because the other method was 37 moves, if I remember right. Yes, but 37 moves. So thanks to the new method, the change of front, the solution has been cut in half, it's even 1/2. We could have reduced it by 1 more move, however we think for the sake of the 1 little move it's not worth burdening the reader's attention. Okay. So you see, you can do things in different ways, and you saw with this other method you saved a lot of time. And I will give you, as a very easy test question, white mates in 3 moves and show that in this position, that's additional, show that in this position any rook move leads to the desired goal. Absolutely doesn't matter, when that is the idea of this, where you move the rook. It absolutely does not matter. Let's say we go here with the rook. Looks crazy. If the king goes here, we cut away the file, he goes back, checkmate. If you go to the other side, I mean, Sebastian showed it for the rook going here. So if you go here, again the same idea. Checkmate. So it really didn't matter where the rook was going. Even if you block one way, so the rook cannot go here, the king cannot go here, then you do again the same thing. Rook has to move back. Checkmate. So now we will go to mate with the queen. Like the rook, the queen can only give checkmate after driving the opponent to the edge of the board. Of course, it's easier for the queen to deliver mate since, first, the number of checkmating position has grown, that's true. And second, driving the opponent to the edge of the board offers no difficulties, as this may be achieved in many different ways. Along with the previous mating positions, we do the analog ones. You see, theory shows us that even with the unfavorable placement of the attacker's pieces, only 10 moves are needed to force mate. However, and without getting into all the subtitles of this ending, anything beyond 12 moves will hardly be necessary. The first thing white needs to do is to set his pieces in attacking formation. The questions of whether to move the queen or the king first looks immaterial to us. If we need an extra move to achieve our goal, this should not face our reader. Only in so-called chess problems are you required to give mate in a certain number of moves. In such, we will do one later. In such cases, this requirement is justified by the elegance of the outer solutions. Boom, check. King runs into the middle. King goes there. I mean, we just show you if we do not that much. King f7. So now we have brought our pieces together. Now black may either go to the c file or stay in the center. So we will look at both of these variations separately. So let's say king c4, king e5. You have to bring the king anyway because you need both pieces to checkmate. King c5. If you had gone here, the king had just increased the pressure. That had lead nowhere. Queen b3. I had played queen c3, driving the king to the next last file, but it doesn't make a difference. We already had the idea of change runs in the last chapter. King c6, queen b4, and that's the main thing. The queen can just follow the king, so she just blocks the squares in opposite to the rook, because if that would be rook, the king could come closer, but it's not possible here. It cannot move here. He has to go back. The queen follows him. The king already goes to the edge. Queen b7. King e8. King e6. And then it's made in the next move. For example, this one. Boom. And that is different to the rook, because the rook can only checkmate on the rank itself, and therefore all the files have to be covered. But the queen can give just a checkmate here because the queen is protected by the king, and the queen herself attacks all the squares and attacks the king, because the queen moves like rook and the bishop. And now we doing it when the king stays in the center, but that will also go in a very fast way. King e4. I won't do king d5 here because it's mirrored. D6, sorry. So forcing black to give up the center. He runs away. If he had played here, we just had moved by the king, and it had been the same principle. Okay. By the way, I also show you other methods afterwards. You see, he's always using the same thing to cut off as many pieces as possible. So we're chasing him again. And now it's already made in the next move, you see that? So we can checkmate here and we can checkmate here. As we can see from the previous solution, the one before, we recommend that you give check only as an exception. On the whole, in the endgame, in the great majority of cases, the collateral siege is more important than hand-to-hand combat. It is more important to cut him off than to attack him. That's nice. And by the way, I also show you another method that's very easy. And I call this method the queen chase. Decide where you want to chase the king. You go here. King comes further. You move your king now. That's a waiting move, and now the king is just chased by the queen. The only thing you have to be cautious. In this situation, do not auto move, because that is a stalemate. In this situation, just go here, for example. And then you bring the king here, and then you do checkmate here. Yeah, but to be fair, it can take one or two extra steps, extra moves, but with the queen more, it's not a big thing. White's turn. In how many moves can white force mate? So one could think that you move the king here and then checkmate here. In this situation, if you play king g3, it's a stalemate because the queen only moves diagonal way, so all these squares are guarded, but the black king is not attacked, and it's his turn. He cannot do another move because there's no piece left, and so this would be stalemate. Check in 3 moves, talked about, you go here. King has some space left. Then you go here, or you go here, or you can even go here. King moves again, checkmate. If you move the king here, it's also stalemate. The 2 bishops in combination, I already tell you, have a strength. 2 bishops on neighboring diagonals hem in the opponent very much. They fire this way, and therefore the king only could move on the squares. So you see the bishops in combination are really powerful. And so it's not difficult for white to hem in the black king. How is he going to be driven to the side of the board? The bishops may be compared to 2 lines of an army, herding the king in the direction of the c6, b7, a8 line. The first thing to do is increase the range of activity of the bishop standing in the rear. That is to try to transfer the bishop at a2 to the a4, e6 diagonal. In other words, this task is fulfilled by the king. Therefore, the first thing we do is to bring the king from e1 closer to the frontal position. King b5, so he tries to attack here. 3, king h4. Of course, the bishop moves away and he cannot attack this bishop because all these squares are guarded. King b5. Bishop b3, you now wonder why bishop b3. Now the bishop is also guarding this square. So you see the bishops are very strong in combination. So, and we wanted to redeploy this bishop, so that's the first step. Why king d4? If we have played this move, it had looked fine, but the king could slip through the net, you know. And therefore we play king d4. King e5. So we are threatening to play bishop f5. And the king could not escape. So if you go here, it's pointless because we played this one. Yeah, I said before to blubber. But now the bishop goes away. King d7. Bishop e4. So the idea we talked about, that we want to bring the rear bishop to this diagonal. One black has to retreat. The triangle narrows. King d8. So now white repeats the maneuver. It now goes faster because the king is already here, you know. Again, the same idea. So king cannot move here. b7, king d7, king b8. Of course, in such situations you should be cautious not to draw. And now we play bishop a6. So everything is blocked except one move. This one. We go here. That gives the king again space. But we are creating the checkmate net. King b6. The white king has occupied the very best position possible and freed the bishop on c5, king on b6, and bishop on e6. Keep the black king trapped. Okay. King goes here. Of course, check. King goes here. And we finish it with d6. Checkmate. If the kings on the board have only one minor piece with no pawns, then mate is not possible. So if you only have one bishop, for example, or for one knight, mate is not possible. So now we did the first chapter of the book, the Russian Handgame Handbook. So thank you. See you around. Thank you for being here. Bye bye.